So let's go ahead and start with this object here, and I want to go ahead and use NURMS on this to smooth it out here. And we're going to scroll down in our command panel, and we're going to go to the Use NURMS subdivision, and we're going to check that. And what you'll notice is that this really smooths out, but at the same time we do lose a little bit of detail, a little bit of sharpness in our model. Now you can adjust the iterations to make this smoother if you like. Now remember, with iterations, if we take this up too high, you could crash your computer, especially if it's not a very high-end computer. Alright, so let's go ahead and let's keep that at 2, and let's reshape this to get our details back. Now, one way that we could go ahead and get those details back and make the edges a little sharper is to actually add some more geometry in here. So we're going to actually use what's called our Swift Loop tool. So let's go to Edge Mode, and I'm going to switch over to Edit underneath my Graphite Modeling Tools, and I'm going to click on Swift Loop. Now you'll see that whenever we hover over an edge, you'll see that we get this green line that goes all the way through our model. And this is going to build an edge loop. And an edge loop is essentially a set of edges that are connected end to end. So before we do anything, let's go ahead and switch over to perspective. And I'm going to orbit around this just so we can see this a little bit easier. So let's go to Edit and Swift Loop. And you'll see that I'm going to be actually inserting an edge at this point. So if I click on that, it inserts an edge. Now you'll see that it did go ahead and change our geometry a little bit. It kind of made it a little bit harder in that area. So let's do one more underneath that. And we're going to go ahead and right click to end our Swift Loop tool. And let's go to polygon mode. And I'm going to select just these bottom polygons, just this little cap on the bottom. And what I'm going to do is actually scale this in and push it up because I'm trying to get this crease right here. So I'm going to scale this in on my X and Y just a little bit, and then I'm going to grab my Move tool and push this up. Okay, so what this does is it creates a nice little crease right here. Okay, now you'll notice that we have a bit of a crease right here as well, so we can do the same thing. So let's go to our Edit and Swift Loop, and let's add some geometry right along that edge there. So we're going to go, let's try this edge here, make it a little bit easier. Let's click above that orange line right there, and let's click below it, and that'll really crease that edge. Okay, let's actually let's hit Control Z one time to undo, and try that one more time, and that's about as good as we're going to get there. Now what we could do is we could go ahead and right click to end that edge Swift Loop, and let's select that middle set of edges. So I'm just holding down Control and clicking on the orange line, and you'll see that it's turning yellow, and then also the white line in the background on our model is turning red. So let's select those, and then we're going to go ahead and use this crease underneath our Edit Edges rollout and really crease that line. So as we increase that, let's turn off edge mode so you can see that there. That really got a little bit harder, so let's do a quick render, and you can really see that line there. Now this line is not supposed to be that hard, and you also notice that it created a little bit of tension right here. Okay, so I want to decrease that. So let's go back to Edge, and let's decrease that. So we'll take this down. I'm actually going to take it all the way down. I don't actually need that, but I do want to show you that crease tool there. Okay. Alright, so now let's go ahead and add some more geometry along the top to make this a little more square instead of round here. So let's go to our Edge mode and use Swift Loop, and we'll hover over this edge, and you can see that it's going to create this loop here. We get a preview of that. We'll click one time and finalize that loop, and we'll do one on the other side as well. So now you can see how this is getting a lot harder. Okay, so we're doing some really nice hard surface modeling here. So let's turn off edge mode and just kind of take a look at what that looks like. Let's do a quick render, and you can see that we've got that detail that we have in our reference image. Okay, so let's go ahead and apply NURMs to this piece here. And in order to apply those NURMs, we're going to right click and convert it to an editable poly. Okay, so we've basically just collapsed that taper into this edit poly object. Okay, so let me hit Control Z, and just so we can see that a little bit easier, we have edit poly and we have a taper modifier. So if we convert it to an editable poly again, it basically just collapses that in there. Okay, just wanted to make sure that you understood that. So let's go ahead and scroll down and let's hit Use NURM Subdivisions. Now you'll see that once we've done that, it's really rounded out this geometry. It doesn't look much like the cylinder that we had before. And again, what we can do is actually just add some more geometry and really crease or get that detail back. So let's go to Edit, Swift Loop. We're going to add a swift loop right here, and already we're starting to see that shape again. And we'll do one around the bottom. Okay, and that's looking much nicer. Let's do one more toward the top here, and that gets even tighter there, and one at the bottom. Okay, and that's looking really good here. If we want to, we could adjust the iterations a little bit higher and make this really smooth, but I'm going to save some memory, just keep it at 1 because it's really not that much of a difference. So let's right click to end our swift loop tool, and let's add that pivot in between these two objects. So I'm going to go to my Create panel, and we're going to use a cylinder. Now what we want to do is actually make sure that Auto Grid is turned on here, because this will allow me to actually create a cylinder on top of another object. Okay, so if I go ahead and click and drag my cylinder out here, and I drag this up, we can see that we have a cylinder that's been created on our geometry. So this makes it just a little bit easier so we don't have to move our cylinder. Now normally with the Auto Grid turned off, it would go ahead and create a cylinder on the ground plane down here. So let me try that. Let me just click and drag and move this up, and you'll see that it just really created it off in the distance, not really where we wanted it to be. Okay, so that's a really good use for Auto Grid. Okay, so let's go ahead and center up this piece here and size it up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to my top view. I'm going to hit F3 on the keyboard just to see my wireframe. And I'm going to try to center this up on my pivot objects here. And I'm going to scale this down in the X and Y just to make this a little smaller. Okay, because I don't need it to be quite that large. Okay, let's switch back to our perspective, and let's hit F3 to show our shaded faces. And we have our objects in our scene here, so we are finished with our pivot. Now if you like, you can go ahead and select those and adjust that color to black, and then apply that material, that gray material that we had before, just to make this a little bit neater and presentable. Okay, alright, so we are finished with this front pivot, but we'll notice that our fender is not actually fitting on our front pivot objects. So what we can do is we can actually use that FFD just like we did with the frame here. But what I want to do is I want to be able to use the FFD on this object as well as this object. So let's select both of them, and we're going to group them together. So I'm going to hit Group, and I'm going to give it a group name, and I'm going to call this Fender. And we'll hit OK. And I'm going to go ahead and apply that FFD modifier. And I'm going to go ahead and use a 4x4x4 just because it allows me to move in smaller sections. We're going to go ahead and go to Control Points, and we're going to select all of these control points on the top and scale them in the Y direction. So now my fender is fitting inside of my pivot object here, and we might have a little bit of interpenetration here, so I want to actually move this back so to where it fits a little bit easier into my pivot object. Okay, and now I want to do this along the bottom because I want this to taper off a little bit more. So I'm going to select these vertex points here, or control points, scale those in, And I'm going to select the outside ones and scale those in as well. Okay, let's go ahead and try these and see what we get out of that. And that's scaling that up really, really nicely there. Okay, so what we've done in this lesson is we've created our front pivot points, and we've also adjusted the forks so they fit for our pivot point, and we've used NURMs to really smooth some things out. Now what we're going to do in the next lesson is we're going to actually finish out the fork objects that will